Hello everyone, and welcome to this video in which I will explain to you the process of creating a glossary in Excel into a SDL term base, that is a file with the file extension SDLTV. Okay. Now, what are we going to do in this short video? As I was trying to explain during the class, the idea is that probably in the past you have gathered your own terminology and you have collected all those terms and uh, definitions and equivalents in a glossary in Excel. Well, that is fine, but that's something that will not work in SDL Travis Studio, especially in the editor view. For that, you will need a file with the file extension SDLTV. Alright, so let's begin with a file that we want to convert into a term base. Alright, so we have here a simple Excel file, and as you can see, it is very likely that it has the same layout that you have for your own glossaries in Excel. Perhaps you have a column for your source term, a column for your target languages or one language, and additional columns for extra information. As you can see, we have one column for the subject and another column for definition and notes. This should be the preparation or the layout all files we want to convert should have. I mean, if you have a glossary in Excel in which, for example, you have definitions that are included in the same term, that is in the same cell, or synonyms in the same cell, that won't work. You will need to prepare the file first in order to have a successfully conversion. So what I'm trying to say is that if you have in your glossary in Excel something like this, okay, then you need to prepare that file. I mean, that's something that you should not have. Instead, you should have all your possible synonyms, if you have more than one, in different and separate columns, like the one that you're seeing here. Again, this is important so that the process can be completed successfully. All right, now, but before actually going into the conversion process, I was trying during the class to show you how MultiTerm desktop works. I was explaining to you that MultiTerm desktop is the free application that you receive when you when you purchase a freelance license or a professional license of SDL Travis Studio. In this case, I have a professional license, that's why I have it in my computer. In case you don't know or don't remember, you can find the installation file of MultiTerm Desktop in the support and in the download section on your SDL account. Okay, good. Now, let me actually show you quickly how MultiTerm looks like. So I will use the search box. Okay. Now MultiTerm is open, and as you can see, it's quite similar to the layout used in SDL Travis Studio. We have a ribbon composed by tabs that at the same time are composed by different buttons that will be active or inactive uh, depending on what we are doing at the moment. We have a sort of navigation pane, but this is actually something. It's going to this area is going to show some additional and valuable information. We have the list of available views in the application. For this case, in MultiTerm desktop, we only have 3 terms: term-based management and administrator, and we don't have a sort of central area similar to the one that we have in SDL Travis Studio. Okay. Now, as I just said, before actually going into the conversion process, I would like to quickly explain to you how MultiTerm works, and, for example, how to create a simple term base. For that, we will simply need to go to the Home tab here and click on the command create term base. Again, a term base is a file, so we need to name that file and specify a location where we want to save it on our computer. So I will call it, yeah, new term base, that sounds good. And I will place it exactly in this location. So I'll click on save. Once you do that, the term-based wizard will be open. This term-based wizard will help you complete the creation process of the term base. Here we simply click on next. Here you will be offered several options. As you can see, we have the default option, which is create a new term-based definition from scratch. This is the option that we will use now, but there are other options that are useful depending on your situation. Okay, so once again, since this is our first term base, we are going to use the default option. Okay. Here we are asked to enter a friendly name. A friendly name is a name that you will see appearing here at the top of the application. Okay. Let me call it new term base friendly name so that you can see it in a moment. You can add an additional description, copyright, etc., etc. Let's click on next one more. Here we are asked to select the languages we want to use in this term base. Remember that a term base is a multilingual database, which is different from translation memories and auto-suggest dictionaries. They are both bilingual databases, but a term base is multilingual, so we can work with more than 2 languages if we want. For this case, I will simply select a few languages, English as usual, then I'll select add, then French, seems fine, good. Then yeah, German, then I don't know, Italian, anyway, and actually Spanish. Okay, so these are all the languages that I'm going to use in this term base. It is not mandatory that you select more than 2 languages. If you know that you will always work with 2 languages, then select those, and that's it. Okay, good. Let's click on next. Here we are now asked to select the descriptive fields that we are going to use in this term base. And what are descriptive fields? Well, descriptive fields are basically the fields that will contain extra information about the term itself. For example, in this Excel file, a descriptive field would be the subject header, the definition, and notes. Spanish in this case, or what the column that has the synonyms, no, that would not be a descriptive field. The other type obviously would be a language field, and that would correspond to the corresponding languages, for example. Okay, let's return to MultiTerm. Good. So you saw that in that initial Excel file we have a field for a column for definition. So that would be something I'd like to add to this term base. So I click on add. Then how about notes? Yes. Subject, obviously. And I can add as many descriptive fields as I want. And one thing that I can do additionally is that I can specify what type of information these descriptive fields will store. So when you click on, for example, definition, here on the right, you will see that the properties option will be active. And when you once again make sure that one of the fields is active or selected, and you click on properties, you will be able to select the data type. we have several options: text, number, boolean, etc., etc. So for example, if you're just trying to store like text because it's a definition, because it's I don't know, it's an example of you, it's a note, etc., etc. Well, text would be definitely the option. If you're trying to actually um, select a field for to store, sorry, the subject, I would suggest in this case pick list. Why? Because perhaps some of you who have worked with spreadsheets in the past will understand this reason, which is that when you're trying to enter information into sort of database, some databases do, distinguish between capital letters and lowercase letters. So if I had entered a term, or yes, an option like, for example, software with capital letter, and then later I entered the same option with lowercase, for that database, that would be two different options, two different values, and obviously we didn't mean that at that moment. So in order to prevent that kind of situations, when you need to make sure that you're working with a limited list and you want to avoid that kind of situations, a pick list option would be the best thing. The other options that you can see here are date, boolean, which is the yes or no type of field, and that's depending. That will be depending on your needs. Okay, so let's click on this is for the definition field, so text, that's okay. Notes, that would be once more text, so that's fine. Subject, let's actually show you an example. Okay, your pick list, and when you do that, you are asked to select the options that you want to insert into this pick list. So I will click on the plus icon here, and then I will enter the different options. So that could be, for example, software, one option, and the other could be hardware. Then I don't know if I manage the same field in this or knowledge in this term base, I could add like electronics or something if I wanted to indicate as a different option. Then I will click on OK, and then I will click on OK once more. Good. Now, here is perhaps the most difficult part to understand. Not that it is really difficult, it's just that for most people this is a new concept, so that's why sometimes it's difficult to grasp. But here we are asked to indicate the entry structure of the term base. And what is the entry structure? Well, that's basically how the information is going to be organized in the term base and be displayed to the final user. Basically, we have three different levels in all term bases created in SDL Plus Studio. We have the entry level, which is the top level. We have language level and term level. Well, entry level is something that is associated to the whole concept itself. If you want to represent the concepts that is associated to a thing that has uh, four tires, that works with petrol, um, that sometimes can be electric, etc., etc., and I think you know what I'm talking about. Then you use information associated to that entry level. But if you want to go more specific, and if you're now interested to add information to that concept that we have just mentioned, but in a specific language, then you will need to go to the language level and think of how it is going to be expressed or defined in German or in English or in Spanish, etc., etc. But if I want to go deeper now, and if I want to talk about the different ways I can call that concept in one language, then I would need to go to the term level. And a term level in this case would be, for example, vehicle, would be car, would be automobile. I know that there are some differences, and you can argue that not all vehicles are cars, but I'm just trying to give you an example here. If you want to go and have that level of detail that you're talking about a specific term. I know that the term may have synonyms, but if you want to work with a specific, uh, what a specific, one specific way to name that concept, then you will need to go to the term level. That's more or less how the entry structure works in SDL multi-term. All right. So usually, and that's something that you will need to define on your own. Um, for example, when you're talking about subject, this is something that should be placed at the entry level. Why? Because it's something that affects the rest of the concept itself. I mean, uh, very likely, if you choose a subject, it would be the same subject in all the same languages. I mean, if you select software, that would be the software in German, that would be software in English, in Spanish, etc., etc. So subject should usually be placed at this level. So for that, you will simply make sure that you select both the scripted field and the level, and then click on Add. Okay. Then for the um, other fields here, well, if you have a definition, actually, for example, this is something that it depends on how you organize your term base, on what language you should consider the source language. And for example, here, if you're going to enter a definition, you should specify what language the definition is going to be. So if it is English, it should have been called um, English definition. And there's something that, in my opinion, should be placed at the term level. And for that, you first of all need to make sure that you're not selecting other additional fields. So deselect here, and then place it here, and add. Notes, well, notes it's something that, once again, in my opinion, has to do with a specific terms in a specific language. So to me, that should be at the deepest level, which in this case is term level. So once again, we select here, and we click on that, and that's it. Now we click on next. You can see we are done with the process. We click on finish, and good. All right. So what happened? Well, we have just created our very first term base in SDL multi-term. And you can see that this is the friendly name that I was telling you about, the name that you would see appearing at the top of the application. Let me quickly show you what is the process of adding terms to a term base. Well, the term base is open, the one that we have just created. We simply need to start adding terms. So we click on this button here that says Add New. Good. Well, but something I'd like to do first is I would like to change the source and target languages here. I mean, like the default, not that they are the only ones. English, German, and I would like to select this view here. Good, and I will click on Add New again. All right, now look at what we have here. We have boxes to enter the corresponding terms in all of these languages here. So for example, let's stick to the example that we had a moment ago. Let's call this car. No, but it should be lowercase. In German, I think it's auto. French is tier. And I'm not sure about Italian, so you know what? I will skip this one just so that I don't make a silly mistake. Good. And then you can see that this is pretty much the language level for each term here. That if we want to start adding extra information such as the subject, well, we would do it at the entry level, which appears here, subject. We selected pick list, so we are asked to select only among the options offered here. I know that I have just entered terms for the automobile industry, but let's imagine that we want to select this value, for example. We click outside. Then if we want to add a synonym for a term, which would create another yes, name of an address or that concept, then we would simply click on next to the arrow um, appearing on each language. Click on term. Good. And that's it. This is how you would add manually terms to a term base and the corresponding associated uh, information. Okay, so once we are done with that, we click on save. And that's it. We have just created this first term base and we have added a term. Now, imagine that we have this task, the task of adding all this information into the term base. And imagine that you're not dealing with a list of only 13 terms, but 130 or perhaps 1300 terms. Well, doing this manually one by one is obviously not the most efficient way to do that. For that, then we will need to talk about a process that helps me convert all that information and take it to the translation sorry, to the term base in a few steps. And that's why we now need to talk about that additional application that I was telling you about during the class called MultiTerm convert. Okay, now if you have successfully installed MultiTerm desktop, which is this application here on your computer, then probably, well, 100% sure, the application called MultiTerm convert would have been installed on your computer as well. Okay, so you only need to look for it. Once again, let's use the search box. Let's click on or let's type convert. You can see that I have here two options: Glossary Convert, which is the app that you can download from the SDL App Store, and that will help you complete the process in a similar way, but actually sometimes it's a little faster, it's more convenient. But if you want to understand the whole process, then you should do it this way and use this one, SDL 20 MultiTerm 2019 convert. Okay, so let's do that. Good. And this opens a wizard. Here we click on next, and let's begin with the process. One thing that we should do first is to uh, close the file that we are working that we are going to convert. Now, remember what I was telling you. In order to have a successful conversion process, you need to have a very organized Excel file. And organized means in this case that all headers are pretty well defined, like this. No need of bold here. I mean, this is plain text would be fine. You cannot have multiple values in one single cell, so this is should be this is not correct. So what you need to do is to make sure that you only have one term in your cells or one value. If you have additional terms or synonyms, you can put them in a separate column. And if you are going to actually do that, one thing that you need to do is to name that column of synonyms with the same language. There's no need to add variations here like a Spanish one or Spanish definitions, sorry, Spanish synonyms or a Spanish extra term. No, that actually will create a problem during the process. So this is the basic layout that you have. First, you need to make sure that your Excel files have before starting with the conversion process, right? Let's save here and let's click on close. Good. All right. Now we return to multi-term convert. Here we are offered two options. New conversion and load an existing conversion. Well, this is going to be our very first conversion, so let's stick to the default option. Let's click on next here. Then have a look at this. These are all the file formats that are supported in this conversion process. We can clearly or quickly see the Microsoft Excel format. That's the one that we're going to use. But we also see the term-based exchange format. Now, during the class, you will remember that I was telling you about how Microsoft released all their terminology um, online, and the way they did it is that they published a tbx file, and then you can download that and then you can work with it. Well, if you do that, then that would be a matter of just working with that file and selecting this option here. Okay, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to simply process this Excel file. I will select that, and then I will click on next to continue. Good. Now here we are asked to select the Excel file that we want to convert. So where it says input file, we click on browse and we select the corresponding file, which is this one. And what is going to happen is that after the process is completed, MultiTerm convert will create three new files. One of them is not really important, but the other two are very important in this process. The first file is going to be this one, a term-based definition, a file that will have the file extension xdt. And the term-based definition is something that will have all the information required or associated to the structure of a term-based. And we are here talking about the languages that are used in a term-based, the scripted field, and the entry structure, how the information is organized. We will also have another file which is called the output file, and that file will usually have the file extension XML. So those of you who work with XML, well, you can see that this gives room for plenty of possibilities. This XML file is the one that will have information about the terms themselves with their corresponding values associated to the specific field. So for example, this XML file will have the information about the term car that we have in English, what is equivalent to German, French, and it will have the corresponding value associated to the subject field and other extra information that it may have. Okay? So these two very important files are going to be created and saved in the same location where you have the original Excel file. Okay? That's the default path chosen by Studio. If you want to change, by MultiTerm. If you want to change that, well, feel free to do that. This is the settings that the configuration that I want. So I will click on next here. Here now, I am asked to match the corresponding headers that I have in the Excel file with the corresponding value. Is it a language field or a descriptive field or something called a concept ID? Well, a concept ID is simply a number that you associate to a term, and this is simply another way to match things in STL multi-term. But in this case, very likely, or the two important considerations are related to language fields or descriptive fields. Okay. Now, by default, multi-term will associate all available headers on the left with a descriptive field. And that is fine, for example, for the first header, which is subject, and which is a descriptive field, as we have discussed so far. So that's fine. But when we click on English, we see that it's still associated to a descriptive field. That is not correct. All languages that you have here should be considered language fields. Okay, so for that we select language field and we select the corresponding match language. English. Let's do the same thing with German. Good. Then we do the same thing with Spanish. Okay. Good. Good. Then for definition, this is fine. We have the scripted field, and for notes we have also this a descriptive field. That's fine. Here, look at this. I was missing something. Oh well, not necessary. I'm sorry about that. I was thinking about this uh, subject that I created for this term base, which is different from the one that I have in the Excel file. Now remember that if I want to make that different type of field, I will simply select the corresponding option here. I will select, for example, pick list. Good. And then I will click on next. Good. Now here, as you can see, we are asked to confirm the entry structure that we are going to use in this um, term base that we are about to create. Well, once again, remember that it's a matter of adding or selecting the corresponding field on the right and adding it to the different level on the left. So for subject, once again, good. For definition, I would say that it has to do with English, very likely. So I sorry, select English. Yeah. Then for notes, very likely each term in each language will need a notes field to add information about what it was found, how it was defined, and any sort of useful information. So I will need to do that for all these options here. That would be term. Oh, need to do it. Good. Now, one thing that you can notice here is that we have Spanish number 1 and Spanish number 2. This Spanish number 2 corresponds to the additional column that we have in the Excel file to add the corresponding synonyms. If you have more than 2 synonyms for one single term, then you will need to add a third column, and remember, name it in the same way, the name of the language. Okay, good. Now, this is basically the entry structure. Once again, the way the information is going to be organized and displayed. We click on next once more, and we click on next. Good. Now, 13 entries were successfully converted. Excellent. Click on next and finish. All right, good. So what now? Well, remember what I told you would happen. I told you that a multi-term convert would create two very important files after the conversion process was completed. Those two very important files were the XDT file, which is the term-based definition file, and the XML file. Let's see how we are going to use these files. All right, so let's return to multi-term. Let's actually close this term base that we have open here. So we click on close, and let's create a new term base. So once again, we click on create term base. Remember that the term base is a file, so we need to name it and specify our location. So let's click let's call it, I know it's silly, but let's call it like this, right? And I will place it here. Oh, good. Once again, the term-based wizard is open. We click on next here. Once again, we are presented with these options here, but this time we are going to select a different option. We are going to select the option load an existing term-based definition file, and that is because, remember, we have now, thanks to MultiTerm convert, a term-based definition file. We click on browse here. We select the corresponding file, which is the XDT file. Good. And now we click on next. We once again enter a friendly name, so Excel term base. Oops. And we click on now on next. Good. The idea of using a term-based definition file again is to show you, to facilitate the term-based creation process. Remember what I told you about the term-based definition files. Those are files that have information about how term bases are structured, what languages they use, what descriptive fields are used, and the entry structure. So as you can see, without having to select anything, the languages um, that I had associated in the Excel file have been already selected for me, and this is once again thanks to the term-based definition file. So to me this is fine, and I will click on next. Good. Now, as you can see, some descriptive fields have been created, which are the descriptive fields that I had in the Excel file. Good. And they all will have the corresponding data field that was selected during the conversion process. So once again, we simply click on next. Good. Excellent. Now once again, look at this. We have the entry structure organized in the same way in the way that we selected during the conversion process. Okay. So here, click on next and finish. All right. So you have just seen that the process of creating a term base this time was easier. I only needed to confirm what was offered to me, that it was all thanks to the term base definition file. What now? Well, we have just created a new term base, but that term base is empty. You can see this once again, the friendly name. We need now to complete the second part of the process, and this part is actually the one that you can use in new term bases as well as existing term bases. Okay. So perhaps you don't want to create a new term base to take the information that you have in your glossary Excel. You want to actually send that to an existing term base that you have been using for some time. So this is the process that you are going to do. Okay. Now, you first of all make sure that the term base is open in MultiTerm desktop here. Then you go to term base management here, this view. There, well, you will have the option to see some useful information here. For example, the languages of this term base, the current number of terms and entries, etc., etc. Now, on the left, you're going to click on import. Actually, right-click on that and select process. There, then you will be asked to select an import file, and that import file is an XML file, which is something that we already have. Click on browse, we select the XML file. Good. And select that. You can actually select fast import because we are going to work with MultiTerm. Good. And click on next and next. Good. 13 entries process. That's exactly what we wanted. Click on next once more, and we click on finish. And look at this. Well, now multi-term is showing the usual languages. Let me change it to English, Spanish, and now you can see that the terms are there, and all of them have the corresponding synonym associated to the Spanish language. And you can see that in a few clicks, well, perhaps not so few, but it was definitely faster than adding all these 13 terms one by one. Do you see now that in a few, where in a matter of some clicks, you now have entered all the information into the term base quickly. That's exactly what we wanted to have, right? Well, this is all the process that I wanted to show you during the class. But remember, at that moment, for some, well, I didn't have access to. That was not my computer, first of all, so I couldn't install MultiTerm desktop. It was my fault. I should have made sure uh, the but I was using a computer with MultiTerm, but sorry about that. So I apologize once more about that situation. And as I promised, if you have any questions about this process, which is fully explained and detailed in the workbook, if you have questions about the process, feel free to send me a message through pros, and I will um, try to answer your question. Okay, thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Bye bye.